Here we are, finally at the end of the play. We've sat through 4 acts of Hamlet flailing around, trying to do his revenge against Claudius, and we're headed toward what I call the apocalypse, where all 3 of the plot series will be resolved. Act 5 is only 2 scenes. Scene 1 is basically the burial of Ophelia at her funeral and the return of Hamlet, and scene 2 is everything, so it takes a while to cover both of them. There's lots of questions we could ask about scene 1. Like, one thing that's always been very famous is that when Hamlet returns in Act 5, he's sort of a different character. There's no longer any flailing around. So why is he more honorable, less flailing, more confident, and more at peace? We might ask a question like, why are the gravediggers so comic when the scene begins? What's up with Hamlet and the skulls, which has always been the most famous image of this whole play? Why is the gravedigger that Hamlet talks to smarter than Hamlet, even if he's uneducated? And why does Ophelia's funeral, why does it go so badly? So we'll talk about those things. So as I mentioned with Act 4 ends with the saddest moment in Hamlet, which is the announcement of the drowning of Ophelia. And to sort of lighten that up, Shakespeare literally starts Act 5 with jokes. I mean, and it's kind of inappropriate jokes. It's 2 guys digging graves, and they're making punny and silly jokes to each other. They're singing songs. They basically don't seem to be grave. They're not very serious at all. And they tend to be silly with each other and make us laugh. Shakespeare thought it was funny to have uneducated and likely illiterate gravediggers debate as if they were elite lawyers, because that is what they're having. Ophelia is being buried in a graveyard that is sanctified and holy ground that is next to a church because of the Christian belief of the resurrection of the body, so it's in holy ground. And she's a suicide to most people. She drowned herself. So the gravediggers are puzzling over how is it possible that a suicide is being buried in holy ground, and they're debating whether or not she committed suicide, and they're using sort of legal terms badly and mispronouncing them, and Shakespeare thought that was funny. And the question is actually never resolved, other than the gravedigger saying, I tell you the truth, Ophelia was rich, and Claudius has paid off the church and has made sure that she gets a good burial because he's sort of trying to make up for the death of Polonius, and that's probably the true statement. So Hamlet comes on. We know he's come back through the help of the pirates, and he immediately starts interviewing. Have you noticed he does this with every character he meets? The gravedigger, and we get one of the most profound symbols of the play. Now, Hamlet is reputedly one of the smartest characters, definitely in this play, but sometimes in all of Western literature. And this uneducated gravedigger bests him, is quicker than him, and it's why? Well, it's because when he's talking to the gravedigger, like, how long have you been a gravedigger? The gravedigger tells us, I started digging graves the very day Hamlet was born, the day that King Hamlet Sr. killed Fortinbras Sr., starting the very first plot of the Revenge 3 plots in this play, which is the desire of Fortinbras Jr. to revenge his father's death against Hamlet. So think about that. The gravedigger started digging the day Hamlet was born. He was digging Hamlet's grave. The gravedigger, in a very sort of obvious symbol of the play, is Hamlet's death. He's digging Hamlet's grave. Nothing can overcome death. Maybe love can equate it, but nothing triumphs over it. Hamlet is not, his intellect is no help against this gravedigger, even though he questions him sharply. Basically, Hamlet just wants to know whose grave is this, and the gravedigger will not tell him that it is Ophelia's. It was somebody who's dead. It was not a man nor a woman anymore. It's just a dead body. He just won't answer the question, and Hamlet is sort of impressed at how clever the gravedigger is. So the gravedigger has lots of skulls. I don't know why they're burying Ophelia in such a crowded graveyard, but Hamlet, notices him picking them up, juggling them, beating on them, and asks him questions about how long does it take a body to decay in the earth. This is rot imagery, right? Hamlet, who considers man to be just a quintessence of dust, as he said in Act 3. And the gravedigger tells him it takes, 8 years, 9 years, depending. And then he holds up one skull in particular and says, this skull, was Yorick's skull. And Hamlet knew Yorick. And that's sort of shocking to Hamlet. And Hamlet says, let me see. And we get the most famous image of the play, which is Hamlet looking at his dead friend's skull. Now, most of us have not actually held a real human skull. This is not real, obviously. And none of us have held the skull of a person we actually knew, but Hamlet actually does that. And we learned that Yorick was a jester that was filled with infinite jest. And we get the idea that this guy was kind of a father figure to Hamlet in terms of making Hamlet the joker that he always has been. But think about the image of this living head looking at the dead skull. This is Hamlet looking at death and looking at what is the ultimate fate of every person who ever lived. Hamlet is recognizing and accepting that I may end up revenging my father and killing Claudius, but it may cost me my life. And this is hard for a young man to give up his life. But he's coming to terms with it. Hamlet is learning to love his fate. Hamlet meditates on the skull for quite a while, makes big speeches to Horatio, who provides sort of a choric commentary. But he asks, does everybody who's ever lived turn into this, right? He sees the gravedigger singing and says that skull had a tongue in it and could sing once. He says maybe this is the skull of a courtier who was flattering to somebody. Maybe this was the skull of the first politician. Maybe this is the skull of a lawyer who's getting beaten on the head and not charging him for battery. Maybe this is a great buyer of land. Where's all his land now? He's only got as much land as inside the skull. Hamlet looks into the empty eye sockets of Yorick and sees the fate that comes for us all. Even the greatest, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. Do they look like this? He asks Horatio, and Horatio says, even so. And Hamlet meditates on that mystery of human existence. To what base uses we may return, Horatio, when we might turn into dust, and that dust is used in clay, and that clay is used to keep the winter away from a cabin that we've built. Imperious Caesar, dead in clay, might turn into something to keep the wind away, is the kind of rhyme he does there. Hamlet also talks to the skull and tells him to go joke with my lady and tell her that no matter how much makeup she puts on, this is the end. Hamlet's a little problematic with women all the way to the end. So Hamlet is interrupted. The funeral approaches, and Hamlet can see from a distance that this was a person of some wealth, a person of importance who killed themselves. He can tell from the way that they're walking. This is Shakespeare actually being brilliant, right? He made the gravedigger both a symbol of Hamlet's death and kept the gravedigger from revealing it was Ophelia's death, so that when Laertes says the word sister and opens up her coffin so that he can hold her once more in his arms, there's a big reveal, and that's better drama, and Shakespeare was quite good at drama. So Hamlet listens, they hide behind tombstones or whatever, and when he hears Laertes say the word sister, he realizes it's his dead girlfriend and doesn't know the circumstances of everything of her death. But Laertes is laying it on thick to Hamlet. This is kind of a problematic moment, but both of them have kind of what I would call a love contest. Who loved Ophelia more? And this is mostly about these two guys and their ego and not about honoring Ophelia at all. I mean, even in death, Ophelia does not get dignity. They basically both jump in her grave, wrestle over it, choke each other. They have to be separated. And when they're separated, Hamlet is, weirdly at peace with things. He says, I don't know why you're using me so badly, Laertes, which always shocks me because I'm like, well, you killed his father and then drove his sister mad, so there's a reason Laertes is treating you so badly. But Hamlet says, but it is no matter. Let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will mew, and dog will have its day. Do you see how peaceful Hamlet is there, where he's like, what will be, and I don't need to worry about anything. This is always a tremendously sad scene to me. Laertes is taken off by Horatio. The queen exits separately from the king. In some versions, the king tosses a little gold coins to the grave diggers because they're burying her illicitly in hallowed ground. And Laertes is often standing alone, disheveled above the grave. And you can see that Shakespeare, the writer of Hamlet, is really inspiring Laertes, making that fire within him really big to want to kill Hamlet, because Hamlet has added insult to injury and kind of ruined Ophelia's funeral. And things are just not resolved. The fight was broken up. This is the second of the interrupted ceremonies out of the three that occur in this play. The third ceremony that will be interrupted is the fencing match. And the fencing match is where everything goes wrong or right in Act 5. Scene 2.